Helping break this down can be really helpful, as one senior leader we recently shared this with said, "I wish I had seen this framework 10 years ago when I started in my role." So today I want to talk about 3 different capacities for different leadership levels and how you can use this to help make sense of your leadership. One of the things that we observe with senior higher education leaders in our Evolve program that Drs. Brian Rao, Don Lee, and I observe is this tendency as leaders move up for more knowledge, more meetings, more emails, more capacity, stay later, come in earlier, more. And this commitment is really admirable, but it's not sustainable. It leads to overwhelm and burnout. It leads to poor decision making and ineffective leadership. What can really be helpful is understanding the distinct responsibilities and capacities at different leadership levels. This understanding can help clarify some of the mess and our urge to do just everything for everyone. It helps us let go of what has previously really served us but might be getting in the way of our leadership. It also helps us embrace new capacities that maybe are unfamiliar or uncomfortable, learn and develop them so that we can be better leaders, better serving the people and the organization that we lead. When we think about the different leadership levels, I'm going to talk about this in a way that is oversimplified. It's much more messy than this. So I want to talk about it in a very simplified and oversimplified way. And then we'll begin to break this down and unpack how it actually functions in the real world, messy world that we're leading in. So I want to break this leadership down into 3 different levels. There's operational leadership, strategic leadership, and visionary leadership. Now there's other kinds of leadership, but these are the 3 levels of leadership we see at the senior levels of higher education, kind of director and above, director, chair, dean, AVP, vice provost, provost, VP, president, chancellor. So sort of in that realm of higher education leadership. Operational, strategic, and visionary leadership. Now, operational leadership is often a focus on the functional work of a particular unit or department. It's often the day-to-day, week-to-week execution, and maybe our scope is over the course of this year and then next year and then the next year. The metaphor for this level of leadership is you're like a pilot. You're responsible for safely and skillfully flying the plane with the coordinated support of many others, kind of directing and organizing a particular operation. Next level is strategic leadership. This is where we're really focused on aligning multiple offices, multiple units, multiple departments toward broader organizational or institutional goals. You might think of this as sort of the strategic leadership is how all these different puzzle pieces get organized together. The metaphor here is air traffic control, where you're not really doing much of any of the operations, but you're responsible for how they all fit together. All the moving parts can operate safely and effectively. Another level is visionary leadership. This is where we're focused on co-creating a shared vision and curating an aligned culture. The metaphor here is a champion who explicitly and repetitively names the purpose and fosters a culture that brings aliveness, integrated, and aligned throughout the organization. So that's just a very brief distinction between operational, strategic, and visionary leadership. Now, these distinctions are really important and can really help us understand our leadership. Of course, in any particular leadership role, it's going to be a bit of all of these. This is not only common, it's almost always the case. We might be primarily a visionary leader, but we've got to jump into operational leadership because someone has stepped out of a role. We might be primarily operational, but we've been asked to step up and lead a strategic planning initiative, for example. But these overlaps and misalignments might be because of crises, they might be because of our preferences, they might be because of structural issues, and they might be because of misalignment of other leaders. But when we recognize these misalignments, we can pay attention to them and engage with them with awareness. Now, it might be something we have to temporarily navigate because that's the reality of our context. But we should be aware it's temporary and it shouldn't always be that way. If there's someone who has stepped out of the role and we have to jump in, this is going to be for a short period of time before we can get someone in that role. If there's a crisis, let's not make sure there's always a crisis pulling out of where we want to be focused. Now, when we think about these different leadership roles, we can be misaligned up and we can be misaligned down. Misaligned up is a director who just loves doing the vision and the culture building, but ignores their operational responsibilities. Misaligned down might be a president who is just so familiar with a particular aspect of the operation, maybe a former finance vice president that gets really in the weeds of the finance and the operations, ignoring the setting of the vision and the culture direction that is really required of the role to really help all aspects of the institution function. When we're pulled we're pulled into misalignment, it can create a lot of disruption. We feel pulled in many different directions, but we can help understand where we're over-functioning and under-functioning. It can help us name and navigate structural misalignment rather than internalizing it and thinking this is the way I need to be. We can recalibrate expectations with our supervisors, our teams, and our peers. And it can help us reclaim clarity, focus, and agency in our roles and help us delegate that agency to others, empowering them, and steer clear of other leaders who really are going to be taking on those roles so that we're not all trying to do all three of these, but we can say this is primarily you, this is primarily me, and this is primarily someone else. I'll jump in and help here and there, and I'd love it if you would, but we know who's trying to do this. And we're not all trying to do all of that. Overstepping our bounds, stepping on toes, and then also micromanaging other leaders so they can't be as effective as possible. One of the things that we like to do through Evolve is bring clarity. So this awareness of these different levels of leadership is one of the reasons we're offering 4 different leadership coaching journeys for these different levels of leadership. So the 3 that we've talked about is Summit for that visionary leadership, Ascent for the emerging leaders looking at strategic leadership, and Base Camp for those emerging leaders who are looking at the operational leadership. Again, there's overlap with these, and that's not strictly speaking. Our 4th one is Elevate, which is our leadership coaching journey, particularly for those who want to be more effective in their leadership around equity-centered leadership. Now, a couple of notes. Summit for this visionary leadership at the executive level, maybe VP or president or chancellor, or those aspiring to those roles in the next year or two, is launching in January. We also offer each of these coaching journeys for leadership teams in a campus-based way. A few reflection questions I want to invite you to think about. What is your personal preference for where you focus your leadership energy? Maybe there's something that you are familiar with, gotten a lot of praise for, or just find yourself intuitively drawn to. What's your personal preference? Number 2, what's the actual primary responsibility of the role you're in right now? If you were to leave and they were hire some random person, what would you want that role to be focused on regardless of who is in it? Where might your preferences and your role responsibility be misaligned, and where could they be better aligned? And what would be an ideal mix of operational, strategic, and visionary leadership for your role? Not just what you're comfortable or prefer, but what would be an ideal mix for your role? And what familiar patterns might you need to let go of? And what unfamiliar capacities might you need to embrace that might be uncomfortable and unfamiliar, but you could courageously lean into learning and developing those capacities to improve your leadership and all of those who you serve. I love having these conversations. If you love to connect with me about these different levels of leadership or check out our Evolve Institute programs, I'd love to connect with you.